The man in the faded hoodie stepped through the glass threshold, where the light from a crystal chandelier shone down on the gleaming marble floor. His shoes were caked with mud, their heels worn down, each step leaving an out-of-place trace amidst a polished world chiseled for the elite. No one knew his name, no one greeted him, but all eyes turned toward him, gliding over as if his presence were a flaw on the perfect surface of this place. At the central counter, among the expensive watches set in bulletproof glass cases, a young salesman bowed his head, leaning close to the manager's ear, his voice a whisper, yet loud enough for the man to hear every single word clearly. "Give him the fake one. The real ones are being shipped to Houston tomorrow with the special consignment." He stopped short. He had just walked in the door. He hadn't said a word yet, but that whisper was like a knife grazing his eardrum, an unintentional betrayal, yet as precise as if it had been aimed straight at his heart. Perhaps they thought he was just some random old man. Perhaps they thought a hoodie and torn shoes meant he was unworthy of the luxury here. But they were wrong, very wrong, because he was the one who had founded this brand. It was his own hands that had drawn the first design for the legendary Arcos Chrono line. And it was he, Leonardo Castillo, who was the soul behind the Valmora timepieces empire, where every single watch was a crystallization of honesty, craftsmanship, and family history. He was born in a small neighborhood in El Paso, growing up beside his father in an old auto repair shop. His childhood had no video games, only gears, rotating discs, and long, diligent evenings with an oil lamp. The first watch he made had no second hand because he didn't have enough parts to assemble it at the time, but it ran, and it was accurate. And he believed if something is made with honest hands, it will carry the soul of its creator. Valmora was not born from money. It was born from passion and from a promise to his mother, "I will create something that makes people believe in true value, not just a glittering exterior." And he did it. Valmora became a global brand. Politicians, artists, scientists, astronauts, they all wore watches crafted by him. But as success came, so did distance. Leonardo began to step back, handing over power to new managers. He thought they would continue to protect the values he had built. But today, as he stood in the middle of the flagship store in New York, hearing the furtive whisper in a space of feigned perfection, he knew something had rotted from within. And it wasn't just a swapped watch, it was his entire legacy. Leonardo clenched his hand slightly. The old calluses were still there, the remnants of thousands of hours spent grinding, polishing, and assembling every gear with his bare hands. And now he had returned not to buy a watch, but to see if the heart of Valmora still beat with truth, or just the turning hands of hollow machines. Decades ago, on the southern edge of El Paso, where the desert dust drifted through every crack in the old wooden doors, there was a small garage whose lights stayed on until midnight. Inside, a boy with messy hair and hands stained with machine oil was diligently learning to measure each gear with a caliper, under the strict but loving gaze of his father. That was Leonardo at just 13 years old. His father, a Peruvian immigrant and mechanic, wasn't a man of many letters, but he was a master at listening to the sound of metal. "You don't need an expensive watch to tell time," he used to say, "but if you're going to make one, it must make the wearer feel like they're holding a whole story on their wrist." Leonardo didn't fully understand then, but he remembered the feeling vividly, the feeling when he first touched the face of a watch, placed the hour hand on its axis, and watched it move. It wasn't just time passing, but life beginning. His family was poor, very poor. His mother worked the night shift as a nurse. His father ran the workshop during the day and repaired washing machines for hire in the evening. As for Leonardo, after school, he would rush into the garage as if drawn by an irresistible force. The metal scraps, O-rings, mainsprings, they were all his world. When he was 17, he built his first watch. The brass case was made from an old coffee can lid. The leather strap was cut from his father's belt, and the crystal was a piece of polished plastic. It ran for 11 days before it stopped, but for Leonardo, it was the first invention of his life. Then came a bitterly cold winter, which almost made him give up. The small workshop's power was cut off because they couldn't pay the bill. He had to work while blowing on his hands to keep them warm, sitting in the pitch dark with a small, flickering candle. But it was also on that night that he engraved the first words onto the back of a watch Valmora. "Time is truth." The name Valmora was the name of the village where his mother was born, a peaceful place where every promise was kept. Leonardo wanted every product he made to carry that vow, and then from one watch came 2, then 10, then 100. He walked to every shop in the city, knocking on the doors of every watchmaker, every fashion store, every small boutique, asking them to help him sell his wares. Most refused, but a few, after holding the watch he made, fell silent, because it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was what opened the first door. Leonardo had no marketing strategy, no angel investors, not even a decent suit. He only had a wooden box for his products and the story inside each watch. But that story spread like the hot wind of El Paso, silently, yet persistently. One day, a famous actor happened to wear a Valmora while shooting a cover for a fashion magazine. Then a famous soccer player mentioned Valmora in an interview. Orders skyrocketed. People called him America's new time inventor. But Leonardo still kept his habit of visiting the old workshop every morning, where the old carved wooden table still stood, because he had never done this to be famous. He only wanted one thing every time people looked at their wrist. They would remember that truth, no matter how small, is always precious. Success came like a tidal wave, sudden, powerful, and irresistible. Valmora quickly rose to become one of the most sought-after luxury watch brands in North America. Limited edition collections often sold out within hours. From Geneva to Tokyo, from Beverly Hills to Dubai, everyone wanted to own a piece of the story named Leonardo Castillo. But like many who build from scratch, as the company grew too fast, Leonardo was forced to step back. His health was no longer what it used to be, and a new team, young, graduated from prestigious business schools, began to take over the global operations system. They wore nicer suits, they spoke more fluent English, They knew how to optimize profits and expand market share quarterly. Leonardo only hoped for one thing, that they would still preserve the value he had engraved on every watch face: time is truth. And he was wrong. One late winter morning, before the sun had time to warm El Paso, Leonardo received an email with a very short subject line: "It's fake." The sender was Thomas N. Harper, a retired engineer from Kansas whom Leonardo remembered very well. They had met 10 years ago when Mr. Harper sent a handwritten letter thanking Leonardo for the Valmora watch he wore to his daughter's wedding, a watch that made me feel like I was still worthy. Harper had written, but now he was saying I took it to be appraised because I intended to give it to my grandson. They said it was a replica, no real serial number. I didn't want to believe it. But then they pointed out every little flaw: the materials, the weight, the movement mechanism were all wrong. I believed in Valmora. I believed in you. After reading it, Leonardo went numb, not because of a faulty product, but because it was a deep crack in the foundation he had spent his entire life painstakingly building. A few days later, he began to check review sites, collector forums, and warranty claims, and what he found kept him sleepless for nearly a week. A customer in Chicago reported that his watch had faded after only 2 months of use. Someone in Miami filed a lawsuit because the leather strap had rotted and the clasp was rusted. A collector in Vancouver discovered a repeated serial number between 2 different models. In the comments, the same phrases were repeated over and over. I thought this was real. And then there were the small lines hidden deep in the posts. Heard some branch is swapping out the stock. My friend works at Valmora. He said something shady is going on. Houston, Denver, something isn't right. Leonardo felt his heart grow as heavy as a stone. Not because sales might drop, not because the shareholders would be angry, but because he had let others attach his name to things that were hollow, fake, and unworthy. He looked up at his desk where the very first watch he ever made still sat, no longer running, but still sparkling under the late-day light. Then he stood up, opened a drawer, and took out the old hoodie he used to wear in the early days of building Valmora. If you want to find the truth, you have to go back to the roots. No warning, no press conference, no letter, no assistant accompanying him. Just one man, carrying his calloused hands and the memory of a time when no one knew his name. Returning to the very place he had created to see if Valmora was still worthy of bearing his name. The wind blew cold on Lexington Avenue, New York. In front of Leonardo was the towering glass facade, its glittering boutique lights reflecting like an illusion of the past wrapped in a modern shell. The Valmora flagship store, once a source of pride, it now made him step inside with a mix of anticipation and fear, like a father returning after many years away from his child, not knowing what he would find. No tailored suit, no entourage, no Valmora logo on him, just a faded hoodie, old sneakers, and a contemplative gaze. He walked through the glass door. A wind chime rang a soft ting, like a welcoming gesture. But no one greeted him. The salesman was adjusting his sleeves. The manager leaned against the counter, looking at his phone. An employee glanced at him and immediately turned away. And then Leonardo stopped. In the right corner of the store, near the mini coffee bar, was a sight that made his heart ache. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, was clutching a white box. Her frame was thin, her olive jacket trembling slightly in her hands. Her voice was weak, but she tried to remain calm. "I bought this watch for my father, for his retirement. He only wore it twice. And then the strap just broke. I took it to be appraised. They said it's fake." She opened the box. The watch looked fine, but one glance was all it took for Leonardo to know it wasn't real. The dial's proportions were wrong. The strap was plastic instead of calfskin. The logo was slightly misaligned. "He's 72 years old. He cried when I gave it to him. Now, I don't know what to tell him." Behind the counter, Camilla Ross, the branch manager, raised an eyebrow. Without bothering to look closely, she adjusted the sleeve of her blazer and spoke as if reciting a commercial script. "If you bought it here, it's definitely authentic. Perhaps your father used it improperly. Damage is normal." The young woman was stunned. Tears welled in her eyes. "My father didn't use it improperly. He's so careful he even kept the paper bag. He saved for half a year to buy this gift." No one in the store moved. The customers standing around were silent. The employees whispered. No one intervened. And then Ethan, the young salesman, hair slicked with gel, stepped forward, a half smirk on his face, and his voice intentionally louder than necessary. "If you can't afford the real thing, don't blame others. We can't help you if you bought a fake online and want to return it here." The young woman stood as if turned to stone. Her lips trembled. "Are you questioning my honor?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm just stating the facts. If you don't have a receipt, no warranty card, then we have no responsibility." Leonardo clenched his fists. His fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from restraint. This was the Valmora they were running. A brand born from gratitude and respect. Now a place where people were insulted for daring to believe in what was real. The young woman turned away, whispering as if to herself, "My father wore that watch like it was a treasure. He said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever owned." The door chime rang again as she left, and Leonardo stood there, motionless, heavy. His eyes followed the young woman, not because of her, but because of memory. The memory of the first time he gave a Valmora to his mother. The memory of customers who shed tears upon opening the box. Of every watch hand he had adjusted by hand. Every crystal he had polished through the night. Now, all he saw was contempt hidden behind suits, forced smiles, and soulless watches. Valmora wasn't dead, but it had been severed from its heart. And Leonardo, in that moment, knew one thing for sure. He would not be leaving. He would stay to witness with his own eyes just how far they were willing to pretend. The anger inside Leonardo didn't burn like fire. It smoldered, cold and precise as the ticking of a watch, second by second. He walked slowly toward the counter, where Ethan was still smiling at another customer, as if nothing had just happened. Leonardo stood before him, his eyes quiet but sharp as a razor. Ethan glanced at him, showing no sign of recognition. "Hello, sir. Can I help you with something?" Leonardo nodded slightly, his voice as calm as someone choosing a fine wine. "Not exposing a den of fraud. I want to see something special. The Arcos Chrono line." Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes scanning Leonardo's attire, the old hoodie, the worn heeled shoes, the rough hands. A subtle, mocking smile appeared on his face. "That one isn't usually on display. It's our flagship model. We only show it to qualified customers." Leonardo tilted his head, his sharp gaze locking onto him. "I'm serious." Ethan gave a faint laugh, glancing over at Camilla Ross, the manager, who was standing nearby with an air of indifference mixed with a hint of curiosity. Camilla walked over, her high heels tapping on the floor like a countdown clock to a mistake about to be exposed. She looked Leonardo up and down, pausing for a moment at the frayed threads on the collar of his hoodie. "I heard that hoodie whispering some interesting things earlier," she said, half joking, half contemptuous. "Well then, let's give him a taste of the dream. Get the display model for him." Ethan nodded and went into the back room. Camilla stood with her arms crossed, her eyes monitoring Leonardo as if she were watching a vagrant about to touch the porcelain in a castle. A few minutes later, Ethan returned, holding a black velvet box. He opened the lid and took out the Arcos Chrono, the watch that was once the highest symbol of Valmora's engineering and craftsmanship. Leonardo took it with both hands, cradling it like a father holding a child he had never met. And it took him only 5 seconds to know the truth. The crystal wasn't real sapphire, it reflected the light wrong. The hour hand was slightly misaligned, evidence of a rushed assembly. The weight was off, and when he turned it over where the serial number should have been engraved, there was only a dull steel plate with a logo printed on with a cheap technique. It was a fake. Leonardo looked up, his voice low, even, but carrying a compressed force that felt like it was about to cause a tremor. "Do you have the certificate of authenticity for this piece?" Camilla raised an eyebrow. "Is that really necessary? You haven't said you're buying. And looking at you, I think perhaps a payment plan would be more suitable." Ethan let out a laugh, nodding in agreement. "Are you thinking of splitting it over 36 months? Or do you just want to admire it for a few more minutes before heading back to your night shift at the gas station?" A soft, hissing laugh came from an employee standing near the espresso machine. Even the security guard smirked slightly. As for Leonardo, he remained still, the fake watch in his hand, his palm burning. Not from humiliation, not from being looked down upon, but because they were mocking the very soul of Valmora. A few seconds later, he turned and prepared to leave the counter, but fate wasn't done with him yet. Just as he reached the marble pillar near the exit, he heard 2 voices, quiet but very clear, coming from behind a curtain near the stockroom area. "Denver received the real shipment last week. Houston gets the next one tomorrow. Just keep pushing the replicas onto the sales floor." Leonardo froze. Who's going to notice? People just love the brand. No one checks the serial numbers. His heart skipped a beat. The whisper from earlier wasn't a joke. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was an entire system. And he knew. This was no longer about a single store. This was a cancer, eating away at the heart of Valmora, and the real battle was about to begin. Leonardo stood motionless behind the marble pillar. The air seemed to have been sucked out of his lungs, replaced by a cold draught not from the air conditioning, but from the naked truth that had just brushed past his ears. Denver, Houston, replicas, 3 words, 2 cities, 1 crime. There was no longer any doubt this was not an isolated error, not a rogue employee bending the rules. This was a sophisticated, organized product-swapping system carried out under the cover of Valmora's reputation. Leonardo took a deep breath, then placed his calloused hand on the cold marble pillar. He needed an anchor, not for his body, but for the rage that was surging like a tsunami behind a cracked wall. He returned to the counter. Camilla was adjusting her Louis Vuitton silk scarf, while Ethan was smiling as he texted on his phone. They didn't notice the change in his eyes, no more resignation, no more questioning, only silence and preparation. Leonardo gently placed the fake Arcos chrono back on its tray. He did so not out of respect for the object, but out of respect for himself, a craftsman who had never in his life thrown away even a single flawed gear. Then he pulled out his wallet, slowly. From within the old leather folds, he took out a black ID card with a silver border, bearing the debossed Valmora logo and sharp, metallic lettering. Leonardo Castillo, founder and chairman, Valmora Global. He said nothing. He just placed it on the glass countertop. A click sound echoed not loud, but enough to make the air in the store seem to stand still. Ethan looked down first. His eyes scanned the text, then he frowned, then he flinched, and then silence. Seeing this, Camilla walked over and snatched the card from Ethan's hand. Her eyes darted quickly. Then she suddenly let out a sneer. "This, you must have bought this online to mess with us, right?" Leonardo raised his head. His voice was deep, but it rang like a hammer on steel. "I carved the first Arcos by hand in my father's garage, a place so cold I had to warm my hands by the furnace every 30 minutes just to be able to assemble each component. I remember every gear, every curve of the crystal, because I designed it to last beyond time, even after I was gone." Camilla took a step back. Ethan, his face went pale, his mouth agape. "That's impossible." Leonardo looked straight at him. "You don't recognize me, because you never wanted to know the person who created the brand you cling to. You only looked at clothes, at shoes, and then gave yourself the right to laugh at others." He took a slow breath, not with anger, not with a raised voice, just the disappointment of a father seeing his child twisted into a grotesque shape, caught in his throat. The store fell silent. A few customers began to back away, whispering. A young employee by the espresso machine looked bewildered. Even the security guard, who until now had maintained an imposing posture, quietly lowered his hands, his gaze wavering. Leonardo raised his hand and pointed toward the entrance. "Lock the doors. Call headquarters. Call the legal department. Call internal investigations. Now." Camilla trembled. "Mr. Castillo, please give us a chance to explain." You had your chance when that woman stood before you, begging for justice for her father's gift. You chose mockery. You, he turned to Ethan, had a chance to be a human being. But you chose to sell your dignity, one piece at a time, with a smile on your face. A storm was brewing behind the boutique's glass facade. And Leonardo knew he hadn't returned as a founder. He had returned as a keeper of memory, and he was preparing to wipe out everything that had betrayed it. As soon as he finished speaking, the boutique's atmosphere seemed to suffocate. The people who had just been laughing and chatting were now like wax figures, motionless, silent, and bewildered. The security guard, the tall man who usually stood by the entrance with his arms crossed like a symbol of power, looked at Leonardo, then nodded, walked to the door, and turned the lock. Click. The sound of the lock turning echoed like the first gavel strike of a purge. Leonardo didn't need anger. He only needed the truth, and right now he was its embodiment. He returned to the counter, his gaze sweeping over each employee. Every one of them bowed their head to avoid his eyes. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. No one knew who he was calling. They only knew that a few minutes later, a group of 3 people in grey suits, wearing badges that read Valmora Compliance Division, walked in. No one stopped them. They went straight into the staff room. Leonardo announced coldly, "As of this moment, this store is no longer under your management. You have sold counterfeit goods, humiliated customers, and betrayed the very soul of this brand." Camila tried to force a smile. "Sir, you're misunderstanding." Leonardo raised his hand. His gaze silenced her. "I heard the conversation between Darren and the stockroom employee. You are moving authentic watches out of the system, replacing them with fakes at retail locations. I know Denver has received theirs. Tomorrow, it's Houston. So how many more cities are there?" Camila's face turned pale. Ethan was speechless. A young employee in the corner of the room began to tremble, his lips moving. I'm just new. I don't know anything." Leonardo looked at him, his voice softening. "If you're telling the truth, cooperate. I will protect those who are honest." Just then, a member of the internal investigation team emerged from the staff room, holding a thick file. "Mr. Castillo, we've detected at least 8 branches with similar irregularities. The estimated number of swapped units is over 1,200. The estimated market value is $8.4 million. Leonardo said nothing. He simply closed his eyes for a few seconds, then let out a long breath, as if releasing a pain that had been pressing on his chest for years without him even knowing it. That very night, emails were sent out. Internal summonses were issued. A formal audit storm swept through the Valmora system. But Leonardo didn't stop there. The next morning, before the boutique employees had even arrived, a federal task force appeared at the door, carrying search warrants and arrest warrants. Camila still meticulously made up, her hair in a high bun. Sipping an espresso in the staff room, was stunned when 2 agents walked in, gleaming handcuffs in their hands. "Ms. Camila Ross," the agent said. "You are under arrest for commercial fraud. federal transportation of counterfeit goods, and obstruction of a government investigation. Camilla shot to her feet. "You can't do this. This is a private business." The agent looked at her calmly. "And this is federal law." Click. The handcuffs snapped shut. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to slip out the back door, briefcase in hand, his eyes darting around nervously. But when he opened the back door, Leonardo was already waiting. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to freeze the air around him. Ethan stammered, I don't know anything. I was just following orders." Camilla was the one who made all the decisions. Leonardo took another step forward. Each word he spoke like a nail being hammered into a board. "Camilla didn't tell you to laugh at a young woman in tears over a gift for her father. Camilla didn't make you mock an old man in a hoodie. You chose to do that. And now you will pay the price." An investigator stepped forward. Click. Handcuffs tightened around Ethan's wrists. Police, reporters, and customers all stood outside. Cameras panned over. Flashbulbs went off continuously, but Leonardo said nothing. No explanations, no justifications. He didn't need a stage. He needed justice. That evening, as Wall Street lit up and most offices had gone dark, the ground floor of Valmora Global's Manhattan headquarters was still brightly lit. In the glass-walled conference room, which had once hosted international investors, Hollywood stars, and billion-dollar meetings, now sat only one man. Quietly surrounded by a sea of documents, Leonardo Castillo. No suit, no executive board. Just him, shirt sleeves rolled up, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, with a real watch lying next to a fake one on the table. He flipped through each report. He compared every warehouse invoice. He cross-referenced every serial number list. He checked every shipping contract. At the same time, a special internal investigation team he had personally summoned, comprising independent auditors, anti-fraud specialists, and a team of veteran watch engineers who had worked with him since the El Paso workshop days, was at work. Valmora was no longer a company at this moment. It was a crime scene. A woman's voice spoke from the head of the table. "We can confirm at least 8 stores participated in the product swapping model. Authentic goods were covertly shipped to points outside the system, after which low-quality replicas were substituted and sold at full price in the official stores." Leonardo asked quietly, as if he didn't want to hear the answer. "How many pieces?" 216 units confirmed to have been swapped. Total value, approximately 8.4 million, not including brand damage, loss of trust, and the crisis with loyal customers. Another legal expert added, "We also discovered records of tampering with the inventory management system. Vouchers had their dates altered, original serial numbers deleted, new codes assigned, and the identity of the final inspector blacked out." Leonardo looked up. Who approved it? Several branch managers. But the account trail leads to a bigger name. Ronald Valles, Vice President of North American Operations. The room fell deathly silent. Ronald Valles, the man Leonardo himself had brought over from an e-commerce giant, thinking he would rejuvenate the Valmora machine. The man the press called the strategic mind of the digital age. the man Leonardo had trusted to run the entire chain of boutiques in the United States. And now, that name was linked to $8.4 million in counterfeit goods and thousands of betrayed customers. Leonardo closed his eyes. For a fleeting moment, he remembered the look in the young woman's eyes at the boutique the day before, Clara Alvarez, as she held the watch and said in despair, "My father treated it like a treasure." He clenched his fist, stood up, and said in a deep voice, "Starting tomorrow morning, all Valmora stores worldwide are to re-inventory all stock, all of it, no exceptions. I want to know where every real Arcos is, whose hands every fake one has fallen into, and who allowed this to happen." An assistant asked quietly, "How should we handle this with the media?" Leonardo looked at him, his eyes no longer somber, but blazing like a fire that had been reignited after years of being buried. "We hide nothing. Tomorrow morning, I will broadcast live by myself from where it all began. No stage, no director, just the truth." That night, he returned to El Paso, not by private jet, no personal driver, just the old pickup truck he used to drive to deliver watches when the workshop first opened. The old workshop, now a preserved warehouse, still had the burn marks on the workbench, the nicks from the times he'd accidentally carved the wrong proportions into a dial. He wiped the dust off the wooden tabletop. Then he placed the real Arcos chrono next to the fake one. The hands on both were still turning, but one had a soul, the other was just an empty shell. And he knew tomorrow, he wouldn't just be exposing a network of deceit. He would be reawakening the spirit of Valmora. 7:58 a.m. New York time, in Tokyo. The clocks read 8:58 p.m. In Paris, 1:58 p.m. All Valmora branches worldwide had been ordered to halt all transactions for 30 minutes. The employees, from regional directors to warehouse staff, from the design team in Milan to the barista in the VIP lounge in Dubai, all stood before their screens. A line of text appeared, "Valmora Global, broadcast from El Paso." Then the frame appeared. No special effects, no stage lighting, just an old room, Valmora's first workshop, where Leonardo and his father had stayed up all night, grinding every bezel in the freezing cold winter. The wooden walls were still stained with paint. The workbench still bore the nicks from his knife. An old wall clock still ticked away, tick-tock, tick-tock, as a reminder that time waits for no one. Leonardo stepped into the frame, no tie, not standing behind a podium, just a man with a pain that had fermented into strength. His voice was deep, steady, needing no notes. "My name is Leonardo Castillo, and today I am here not to promote a product, not to boast about achievements, but to apologize." Silence fell across the screens worldwide. Those who had been with Valmora for 10-20 years had never seen him like this. I put my faith in people who wore nice suits and spoke fine words. I stepped back, thinking I had built a system strong enough to preserve our original values. But I was wrong, and the price of that mistake is not money. It is the trust of people like Mr. Harper, like Ms. Clara Alvarez, and the thousands of customers who believed in my name. He placed the 2 watches on the table before him, the real one gleaming, heavy in the hand, perfect, the fake one lighter, rough and silent. He picked up the fake one, looked into the camera. This is greed. He picked up the real one, and this is love. It is the reason I started Valmora. Then, without hesitation, he raised the fake watch high and smashed it down on the table. The sound cracked through the silence like a bolt of lightning. The watch shattered. Shards of the dial flew out. The hands were bent and twisted, but the real one still lay quietly beside it. The light hitting its sapphire crystal, making it sparkle like a gem that had never lost its brilliance. Leonardo looked straight into the lens, without blinking. From this day forward, every Valmora store worldwide will place 2 things behind the counter. One is my name. The other is the value I have lived by my entire life. If you are an employee of Valmora, remember this: you will never be allowed to judge a customer by the clothes they wear, the way they speak, or the balance on their card. You will treat a janitor with the same respect you show a CEO. His voice hardened like steel. If any of you insults a customer, sells a counterfeit product, or believes that this brand is bigger than the people who believe in it, you will be gone from the system overnight. No warning, no written notice. He paused for a beat. Then he bent down and picked up the real watch, the first-generation Arcos chrono, the one he had made with his father on that winter night. The hands were still running, each tick not fast, not hurried like the heart of an artisan who lives by sincerity. I did not build Valmora in a boardroom. I did not draw its designs in PowerPoint. I carved it by hand, with calluses, with tears, and I will not let anyone turn it into a joke. His gaze softened, as if he were speaking to some young craftsman watching from the other side of the world. If you are working at Valmora because you believe in beauty, in truth, and in self-respect, I see you, and I need you. He stepped out of the frame. A second of silence. Then the screens worldwide erupted in applause. In Milan, a designer covered his face and wept. In Tokyo, the manager bowed deeply to his sales team. In Buenos Aires, a warehouse worker ran out into the back lot and called his mother. He's back. Leonardo is back. Mum. As the speech ended, the sun began to rise in El Paso, gentle, warm, like a greeting to a new chapter that had just begun. Leonardo didn't go back to the office. He didn't answer reporters. He didn't accept invitations from the talk shows that were scrambling to book him. He did only one thing. He drove to the home of the young woman who had been humiliated for daring to demand the truth for her father's gift. The small house was on the outskirts of El Paso. The front yard was overgrown with weeds. The wooden door was faded, but inside was a world that Leonardo had always cherished, sincere, quiet, and never in the headlines. The young woman opened the door. It was the same face, Clara Alvarez, the young woman in the olive jacket, her eyes red-rimmed, and the words he could not forget. My father cried when he received that watch. Now he thinks he's been cheated. She was stunned to see Leonardo at her door, holding a brown wooden box, wrapped in a black and silver ribbon. "I'm sorry to arrive without notice," he said softly, "but I have something that needs to be given to its rightful owner." She stepped back to let him in. The small kitchen smelled of dried chamomile. A picture of a gentle-faced old man hung on the wall and below it. The watch with the torn plastic strap, hung by a thin thread. A thin, grey-haired old man slowly emerged from behind a curtain. When he saw Leonardo, his eyes widened, and he immediately bowed his head. I didn't think you would come all the way here." Leonardo walked over and opened the box. Inside was an original Arcos Chrono serial number 0009, one of the first 10 he had ever crafted by hand with his father. "This one," Leonardo said, his voice choked with emotion, "is the only gift I never intended to sell, but I think it belongs here." The old man timidly took the watch, as if afraid it would vanish in his hands. He turned it over, his trembling finger touching the small inscription, "To those who still believe in truth." "My daughter saved every penny to buy it for me," the old man said, his eyes welling up with tears. "Even if it's a fake, I still wear it, because I know the love is real." Clara cried, not because she was being compensated, but because someone was listening, because someone acknowledged that their pain was real. Leonardo gently squeezed the old man's hand. "I let my brand become a stranger to people like you, but it's people like you who are the reason I started." That day, Leonardo took no pictures. He didn't do a live stream. But the story spread not through social media, but by word of mouth, from one person to another. A week later, Valmora branches began to receive a flood of handwritten letters, emails, and thank you videos from customers everywhere. A single mother in Ohio had her watch replaced with a real one, accompanied by a handwritten apology. An elderly man in Canada received a call from the regional director himself to apologize for an incident that happened 7 years ago. A young man in Brazil, once refused service because of his simple clothes, was now a community ambassador for Valmora in South America. No one ordered this to happen. It was just something had changed. When a CEO is willing to kneel to lift a person up, the entire system will automatically rise in the right way. That morning, at a Valmora boutique in Portland, the glass door opened as gently as it did every day. A young woman walked in, holding a small box wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with the word Dad. She wore a simple white shirt, grey trousers, and her hair was tied back neatly. No watch, no jewelry. Everything about her was simple, just like the worry that was plain to see in her eyes as she stepped across the luxurious red carpet at the entrance. As soon as she approached the counter, a young employee, not yet 25, immediately stood up straight. His gaze didn't drift down to her shoes, nor did it linger on her worn shoulder bag. He simply offered a warm smile. "Hello, ma'am. How may I help you?" The young woman hesitated for a few seconds, then placed the box on the counter. "I bought this last year for my father. Today, I just want to be sure that it's still authentic." The employee asked no further questions, no sarcasm, no demand for a receipt. He opened the box, checked the serial number, and compared the details with his eyes and a magnifying glass. It took nearly 5 minutes, but during that time, the young woman was not left unattended. A colleague brought her a glass of water. The store manager came out to greet her gently. A window cleaner in the back nodded at her as he passed by. And then the employee looked up, smiling. "This watch is authentic. Not only that, this is an early limited edition. Your mother chose an incredibly meaningful gift." The young woman bowed her head, moved. On the employee's wrist, visibly, was an Arcos chrono. The leather strap was old. The case wasn't gleaming, but the hands still turned steadily. After Leonardo's earth-shattering speech, Valmora didn't just change its policies, it changed its entire culture. Every new employee had to go through a heritage week at the El Paso workshop, where they had to assemble a mechanical watch themselves. Every boutique hung a wooden plaque. "Time is truth, and truth begins with how we treat each other." A program called Valmora Listens was created, where customers could provide feedback, share stories, and even recount memories with their watches, and receive a handwritten response from the regional director himself. And Leonardo. He didn't return to the CEO's chair. He went back to the El Paso workshop where he began. But once a week, he would choose a random store and walk in like a regular person. No power badge, no announcement, just an old man with experienced eyes, and the first-generation Arcos chrono still on his left wrist. Once, a new employee asked him while he was helping to wipe the glass of a display case, "How long have you been working here?" Leonardo smiled, his voice as light as a West Texas breeze, "Since before this place even had electricity." At the headquarters, the conference room that was once decorated with awards and growth charts now displayed a single photograph, a picture of old Mr. Harper, the first person to report the counterfeit, hugging his daughter, wearing the real watch on his wrist with a smile as if he had gotten back a lost part of his life. Valmora was no longer the most high-end watch brand, but now they were the most trusted brand, because in the end, people don't wear a watch to show off the time, but to remind themselves to live worthy of every moment. In a world where everything can be faked from signatures to apologies, there is one thing that still cannot be replicated: a real heart. Leonardo Castillo didn't just expose a multi-million-dollar scam. He did more than that. He reset the watch of an entire empire, pulling it back to its original mark where honesty is the standard, not an option. No one forced him to come back. No one asked him to personally visit every store, to hand-deliver a watch to every wronged customer. But he did it not for fame, not to save sales. He did it because he remembered why he started. Not for awards, not for magazine covers, not to become the most successful founder, but so that one day, when a father receives a gift from his daughter, he can smile in silence and feel valued. They say that time is something you cannot touch, but Leonardo proved otherwise. time can touch a person's heart. And the watches he made, they don't just count the hours, they also count dignity. A month after the speech, Valmora launched a program called Every Second Matters. In it, every employee and every customer could tell a short story, a moment when they chose truth over ease. A janitor who refused a bribe to sneak out merchandise. A single mother who saved for 10 months to buy a watch for her child's graduation. A young customer who discovered a small flaw in a product and still came back trustingly because he believed in how Valmora would handle it. Valmora didn't promise they would never make a mistake. They only promised they would never be silent when facing a mistake. And in that world where everything spins so fast that people forget why they started, one man still stood there. The first Arcos chrono on his left wrist, his right hand still bearing the calluses from years of grinding. Leonardo Castillo, not a CEO, not a legend, just an old craftsman, living true to every tick of the time he created. If you have ever felt looked down upon, misunderstood, or treated like a number, remember this. There are still people like Leonardo out there quietly resetting the world's clocks. And sometimes, a watch made the right way can heal more than just a wound. It can restore faith, because time will pass, but the truth remains. There are watches that only measure time, but there are also watches like Valmora created to remind us to live worthy of every second, not for fame, not for the luxury label, but for truth, for kindness, and for an old craftsman who never forgot where he began. If this story touched you, share it, because sometimes just one small act can make the whole world stop at the most necessary beat.